Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marie Venter, and I am your host for today's first ever episode of No Substance with Marie Venter. The idea for this podcast has kind of been cooking in the back of my mind since the 12th grade when I would get bored wiping down tables at a local market I worked at, and now I've told so many people that it feels like I'm almost liable to them to produce this episode and just, spread a good message along with it. So let's get into it. I think I've always sort of had this really good memory for just faces and sort of the people I meet in different situations, like episodic memory and stuff. And I've also been keen in wanting to connect with people. So over the winter break, I had this sort of serendipitous re-stumbling on the work of, I'm going to butcher this pronunciation, but it's a Hungarian author named Frigyes Karinthy. Yeah, he has a short story, you can just search it up, Chains, on shortstory.co, .co.uk, and I was really inspired after reading it to sort of give my 2 cents on it. Hopefully you guys enjoy what I have to offer. It, as a sort of synopsis, it's just the ramblings of people at a party, and they try to connect the attendees of this party to people in 6 or less connections. And at first it's sort of just like a postulated thing, but then they actually start completing it, and they take like a random riveter or welder at a given company, I think working for the Ford Motor Industries. This short story was published in 1929. So the references can be a bit dated, but you get the gist. And they say, oh, I know, they know them, and they know them. And that leads back to me. And I think this offers something really important. One of the quotes from the story is, "Planet Earth has never been as tiny as it is now." And they talk about the technology that's evolving even then and in 1929. And I just think it's so perfect because as we all know, everyone can basically talk to anyone if they really try, through social media, through sort of different communicative means. And I think that creates like the idea of even yes, parasocial relationships are typically applied to like celebrities and their fans, but I think you can like hear names or recognize faces and see those recognizable faces, let's say from class or from work, wherever, and see them pop up on your screen and be like, oh, I know them, or I know someone who knows them. There's something as simple as your mutuals. Yeah. And the author of Chains, I'm not going to attempt again, he says, "We now live in a fairyland. It is smaller than the real world has ever been." And I think, again, that has immense gravity, because it's now easier, yes, to connect to people, and that has some real value, but it's also easier to find someone who maybe wronged you in the past, or potentially have your own dirty laundry aired out, or something of that manner. Because, like I said, those parasocial relationships, you can start to fall, at least I feel this way, you can start to have with these people that you've never actually met, but you recognize their face, and you can, it's human nature to take that sort of thing at face value and not, consider the holistic person at all times. But yeah. So in 1929, as stated in the short story, there were 1.5 billion people on Earth, and now there's more than 5 times that. But the fact that we can still find small integer values of degrees of separation between anyone really just shows how valuable this story really was, at least just in sparking thought and reflection in me. So I think what these chains were able to establish between people show is that we have to take real accountability for what we're saying to people, how we're treating people, because it might turn out that your best friend knows one other person, and that one other person is best friends with the person you just interacted with. And I understand that to be just, treat people with kindness, or but I think deeper than that, just know it's almost like hurting your kin, yeah. Now, I'm not the first person to be inspired by this story. The famous psychologist Stanley Milgram also was inspired by this work, and he ran an experiment where he established that there are approximately 5 friendship links, or links between acquaintances, across the whole of America. And this sort of further popularizes this acceptance of the idea of 6 degrees of separation, which they made a movie on. I believe Will Smith is in it. I'm unsure though. So several cities in this experiment, several cities from all over the US were designated with people to write letters from, and they had to find their randomly assigned person, which all the information they were given about their person was just basic info about a Bostonian citizen, and then the pathway length, since it was like physical letters sent, it would be easy to track how many people they needed to go through to get to the person they wanted to talk to. And it was found that the average amount of jumps that needed to be made were around 5 to 6 jumps. Of course, we could get into some of the problems with this study and how it was empiricized, mostly because most people didn't actually send out their letter, which really depleted the sample size. And those people that didn't send out their letter, it was probably a hindered chain, and that would most likely take more than 5 or 6 people. And also there's probably multiple, like there's definitely a best way to get that letter to the right person, and we don't know if the most efficient pathway was taken, all this sort of things. Or we can think about very isolated communities around the world. This study doesn't really factor in. I think, however, the end conclusion of the experiment, first of all, I think it's a pretty novel idea. I think it's cool that this was in pure size, because it is interesting to think about how many people know everyone. I know this is especially the case in the school I study at. I'm in a relatively small program to begin with, but even so, outside of my program and in the faculty as a whole, there's a lot of overlap between people. Yeah. But to me, it doesn't really matter if there's 5 links connecting us, or 3 links, or 10 links. It's the fact that there's links at all, and they're discrete numbers. And what may seem to be a total stranger to you, most likely, especially if you're in a broader community like a university or a large corporation, isn't going to be that far removed from you, so you need to be careful with the way you act. Yeah, like I said, there's a quantifiable and discrete number of links between us and a lot of the people around us. You could even say everyone around us, and that's on a macroscopic scale, but it's also on a scale I've witnessed in how a conversation can turn, how people are always like, oh, you know them, how that can turn a conversation in a couple of seconds.